Right, so I'm going to just do this cheesy little intro that will make you die a million deaths, and then we'll just chat. So, hello everybody, welcome to the Shift Book Club. As you all know by now, I'm journalist and broadcaster Sam Baker. I'm delighted to be here tonight to talk to Louise Candlish, author of our March Book Club choice, The Only Suspect. Now, Louise was one of those classic overnight success stories that was 15 years in the making. I think it was it your 13th novel, Our House?
It was my 12th, actually. Yeah.
Your 12th novel, Our
I
House.
think it was my 12th. Yeah.
You can't even remember, you've written so many now.
No.
The #1 Sunday Times bestseller in paperback, awarded Crime and Thriller of the Year at the 2019 British Book Awards. And I can still remember the joy on your face when that was announced, really big up on the screen. And it was made into an ITV drama starring Martin Compston and Tuppence Middleton. It was then dubbed property noir for its dark portrayal of a woman whose house is sold out from under her. And Louise clearly realised she was onto something, because she's followed it up with other kind of like, if I say suburban crime, you'll know that that's a massive compliment. Those people, The Other Passenger, and now The Only Suspect, and they're all thrillers that strip back middle-class suburban lives to look at the creepy crawlies that lie beneath. And together, they've sold well over 1 million copies. Now, The Only Suspect, as you know, is centred around Alex and his wife Beth, living in a Channel 4 property programme life in a leafy London suburb. The only blot on their perfect landscape appears to be their inability to get pregnant. A situation made worse when Beth's heavily pregnant friend moves in. And I was going to say Zara, and I thought, I'm not 100% sure that's her name, and I bet I'm going to get it wrong. It is Zara. It is Zara.
It's Zara. Evil Zara.
Yeah, well, I want to talk to you about that. Together, the two women that get caught up in the campaign to convert a local disused rail track into a nature trail, which is a very suburban London thing to do, isn't it? For some reason, though, Alex isn't quite so enthusiastic. Meantime, back in 1990s Camden, which I felt was a subject very close to your heart, we meet Rick and Marina embarking on an affair that's inevitably destined to end in disaster. But what's that got to do with Alex and a neighbourhood nature trail? I was going to say we're about to find out, but we aren't, because Helen, damn you haven't finished it.
Maybe we can banish Helen 5 minutes before
the end
and have a frenzy of spoiler-free chat.
So the way this will work is Louise and I will just chat for a bit about The Only Suspect, about her other books, about characters and structure, about life and Louise's career. And then probably around about 10 to 8, I'll ask you all to turn your cameras and mics on. So anybody who's already in their pajamas, and Liz isn't here, actually, Liz is in New Zealand, and she is often in her pajamas when she comes because it's like 6 a.m. or something there. And then you can ask Louise your questions in person. So Lou, do you want to tell us a bit about the story behind The Only Suspect?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you one of the main sources of inspiration, which was a bout of insomnia I had, which will be familiar to all middle-aged women. And when I can't sleep, I listen to Radio 4, and they were playing a dramatization of Barbara Vine's A Fatal Inversion. And I kind of just did in and out of it. Oh my God, yeah, me too. And I just absolutely loved it. And I hadn't read any Barbara Vine before. And in the morning, it was almost as if I dreamed it. And then, luckily I quickly realized that it was someone else's story. But it did make me think, I haven't done enough in my books about, the sort of the errors of youth and, sort of youthful mistakes coming back to haunt you. And for those who haven't read that book, it's about a group of sort of young hedonists who take over a kind of rambling country house one summer. And the book opens with 10 years later, and the 2 skeletons are found in the garden. And you then move between the 2 time frames to discover what happens. So I thought that I would do one of those myself. But that's kind of where the similarity ends. And I also wanted to to do, again, very hard to say without spoilers, but there was a particular Hitchcock plot that I had been thinking that I would like to have a go at. And it occurred to me that I could sort of combine these two elements, because the Hitchcock plot could only work before mobile phones and the internet. And so yes, it's as you say, it's suburban noir, but it's unusual for me in that it also has this supposedly historical element, being partly set in 1995, which I don't consider ancient history at all. Yeah, so we meet Alex, but we don't know what his link is with Rick and Rollo, who are two flatmates in Camden in 1995. And but both of the strands involve a kind of slightly uncomfortable love triangle, I think it's fair to say, or hate triangle.
Hate triangle, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Oh, how careful do you think we have to be? Okay, Helen, can you just write where have you got to, just so that we know? Because I really don't want to spoil it for you, because it is there are several twists which we'll talk about, and they're really good twists, but it'd be good to know which bit you're at.
If Helen has reached the part where Rick has left Camden and moved into another rental unit, then we can at least talk about the first twist a little bit.
That's true. That's a very discreet way of putting it. What's the she's got to the point where he's just
no, she's still
you're
quite
away
early on. Yeah, not to worry.
Okay, no, it's all right. We can manage. We're just being brats, really. It's like I feel bad. I feel bad now.
No, yeah, I love it when I can talk about, you know, sort of the technicalities of creating the twists, and it's quite freeing, because you know, when you deal in twists and revelations, it's I'm always on the back foot, sort of trying not to give the game away.
I mean, we will talk about that a bit, how to make a twist, because when you did Our House, which it was the most insanely twisty book I'd ever read, and I do read a lot of crime and thrillers, but you managed to walk that line where it wasn't the kind of twist that made you want to punch a wall.
No, I will try not to do those. Yeah,
there are some psychological thrillers, and a friend of mine has written a particularly absurd one, and I would happily say to her face, that made me want to punch you. How do you avoid doing that? How do you make a twist really satisfying, but without not really implausible?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do it purely on instinct, and anything that strikes me as a cliche, like, for instance, discovering your husband of 20 years is actually a psycho, but you'd never had any inkling before the start of the events of the book, then, you know, that kind of thing I wouldn't do. I think of twists as being more about narrative trickery, actually, and the others to do with the plot I think of more as revelations. So in Our House, the big revelation one of the big revelations of the book was a question of identity, you know, discovering that two characters were the same. And you know, when it was dramatized for the screen, you know, that was no longer possible, because, you know, you see the actor straight away the first time he appears as one of those characters. So some of them are just fun revelations where I've withheld the information because the character, the narrator, doesn't know. But I tend to do everything directly through my character's eyes. And so I'm not really kind of being a puppeteer about it. I've literally constructed it so the revelations are genuine to the character. But I have to say it's quite instinctive, and sometimes you know, a revelation or a twist won't work, and so I'll get rid of it. And sometimes I'll be halfway through the book and I'll think of something good that I want to include. And then I'll have that kind of wrangle between whether or not it's worth the repercussions of kind of, you know, retrofitting something. But I really think of my writing in terms of dramatic ironies, and Our House was all about dramatic ironies and about the reader knowing more than fee, because the reader has access to Bram's story as well. And with The Only Suspect, the trickery involves the narrators, I suppose we can say that. But the plot revelations, I try and control the pacing, enough so that there's something interesting going on every so often. But I'm very much a slow burn merchant, so I don't really think in terms of formula or beats or anything like that. I just do it instinctively, I think.
So what comes first for you? So with The Only Suspect, obviously you had that that Barbara Vine moment, but what tends to come first? The idea, the plot, a character? Where do you start and build from?
It's usually the crime or the theme, I think, that comes first, and rather than the characters are kind of build around what it is that I want to say or what I want to do. But I generally, I've learned that what I tend to do is have 4 or 5 sort of little fixations in my mind on a back burner, usually while I'm finishing or publicizing the book before. And then I'll just sort of let them kind of gestate, and I'll try and think of a way that they can all be woven in together. So with The Only Suspect, there was obviously this Hitchcockian element. There was the Barbara Vine inspiration. I wanted to do a little bit of social commentary about, the kind of local eco-warriors and the nature trails and all of the language that's sort of cropped up around that, and the kind of some of the smugness that you'll find in a lot of my books, where people are just thrilled with themselves, living their best lives, and almost performative. And what else did I want to include? Trying to think. Oh, and I really fancy doing. I've been waiting for some time to do the 90s, but I didn't want to do a whole book set in the 90s. And so when I devised this plot and I realized there was no way it could work in the mobile phone era, I saw my chance. Oh my God, I can finally go back to the 90s, because I've been wanting to do that for ages. And it really was a joy, one of probably the most enjoyable of my books to write, because I loved doing the 1995 strand.
You could really tell that. Did you live in Camden by any chance in the 90s?
Yeah, no, I did.
Thought
Yeah, I
maybe
knew it really well. I didn't live on Albert Street, but interestingly, Simon Ashdown, who's the screenwriter of Our House, and he's adapting The Only Suspect, he lived on the actual street that Rick and Rollo lived on, Albert Street in Camden. So it's so interesting. It's been fascinating to hear everyone's Camden stories. I actually lived up in the Camden Square area, which is sort of slightly outside of the kind of blotchy,
kind of slightly to the right, wasn't up Camden Road?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, where Amy Winehouse sadly ended her days, although she didn't live there then, being a bit younger. She was there in the noughties. But yeah, it was a really it was, if anyone younger or not familiar with London, or for someone who's been to Camden recently for the first time, you must wipe that image of Camden from your brain, because it's all sort of gleaming towers and very posh now with Whole Foods. And I went there recently and had a bag of chips, and it was £10. And Camden in 1995 was really grotty, and attracted that kind of early Britpop crowd who were really enjoying slumming it.
Yeah, it's like, do you really realize that we do sound like our parents or something? Oh, it was better in the 90s. Like,
it was better in a way, but it was, you had the standing keys to do your banking, and there were lots of stuff that I love the digital age. But one of the things that really struck me when I was writing was just that ability to be anonymous that we don't have anymore. The characters just kind of leave the flat, and then they're gone. No one's tracking them. There's not CCTV in the way that we have now. It's not just mobile phones, it's surveillance generally. You're not really a free citizen anymore, and we've all signed up for it. So I'm not suggesting it's sinister, although it could be sinister. But back then you could be anonymous and you could get up to all sorts of things and no one would know. I mean, I was in doing some publicity for the book, I was asked for photos of me in the 90s and I could only find one from the whole decade. And that sort of sums it up, really. You probably had more, Sam, did you? If you
No,
were
I've
already
destroyed
in
the
media
evidence.
Oh,
Yeah. No, but in 95, I was actually working on Take a Break, and the office was on Camden Road.
Oh, was
So
it? Oh my
just
God.
up from it, just past the Sainsbury's on the left.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Oh my God.
yeah.
And do you remember I didn't put it in the book, but do you remember in that big Sainsbury's on Camden Road, there was a man who sort of lived there. And he was really jolly and he used to walk up and down the aisles shouting the best of luck.
I think I might have wiped
You
it.
know?
But there were so many people like that. I'm sorry to anybody who doesn't live in London and couldn't care less about Camden in the 90s. But it is interesting, I think, though, the number of crime writers I've spoken to who are desperate to write in a pre-mobile, in a pre-smartphone time. Because I mean, I interviewed Val McDermott and Jane Harper, and Val was talking about one of the reasons that she wrote 1979 and 1989, because she just wanted to go back to a time when everything wasn't trackable and mobile phoneable, and everything couldn't be resolved by leaving your, finding someone about to be pushed off a cliff because you tracked their mobile phone.
No, well, that's
not
exactly
very
it.
mysterious.
It's really hard to commit a crime now, and Our House was a good one because it was fraud, and something that is still happening now. The Other Passenger, which is set in the present day but involved quite a kind of classic crime, I think. I really had to think very carefully about how that could work with all of the surveillance. So I had to create sort of fictitious black spots along the towpath it's set along the River Thames, for those who haven't read it. And so, because the reality is that you can't really kill someone on the streets of London and not be seen by multiple cameras. And it's even quite hard to do anything in a suburban street like those in my books, because everyone's got the Ring doorbells now. They've got sort of their own security cameras. There's dash cams. I mean, it's fantastic for solving crime, but it's quite hard to get away with a crime. And obviously crime writers are in the business of creating plausible crimes. So it just is easier to go back. And particularly if you're someone like Val, who has written so many fantastic books, she can she must indulge whatever desire she has to create a new story, and we'll all sort of go along with her. But some people say they don't like a historical setting. But I do. So, and I'm hoping that my readers will accept the 1995 strand as happily as I have.
So how, because we were saying at the beginning, Our House was your 12th book, and you had been, I suppose it sounds terrible, but like what they call mid-list, which is like popular but not mega popular, and
absolutely,
and kind of at a point where you feel like you're writing and writing and writing, but you're not. And I say this as somebody who is stuck in the mid-list myself. What was it, do you think, about Our House that took off in the way it did? Why was it that book?
Well, first of all, I was stuck in the mid-list, but I had been sort of up and down. I'd had quite a few books in the top 40, including quite a big hit actually called Since I Don't Have You, but that was a more like a kind of emotional drama sort of book, and had been quite a few years earlier. So I kind of had a taste, and I was frustratingly back in this zone where it probably your book club readers might not know how the industry works, but basically you're kind of only as good as your last sales figures. So you do kind of end up being kind of stuck in a zone, and someone has to take a chance on a new work to be able to break out of that zone. And that's what happened with our house. But I think it was the biggest factor was changing publisher. It's as simple as that. Needed, a new injection of belief and mojo, a new sales team who could go with kind of fresh enthusiasm to the retailers and persuade them to take a chance on this author whose previous book had, not sold so well. But that was getting it in the stores, but I think the reason it took off once it was in stores and had huge word of mouth was that it was just a crime that had not been written about before. It was genuinely the first time. It was an original idea. And from my point of view, it felt like a much more complex and sophisticated narrative. I was trying lots of experimental stuff. And I'd, to use another industry phrase, I'd written it out of contract, which for those who don't know means I hadn't signed a contract when I wrote it. I hadn't been paid a penny for it. I was literally sort of cut loose. And so it meant that I didn't really have anyone to please or anyone to caution me about my characters or to say, oh, no, I don't think that's going to sell. Or, oh, no, those characters are a bit dislikable. I'd make them a bit more likable, Lou. There was no one doing that. It was just me and my agent who thoroughly believed in it right from the start. And so I could be really free and bold and ambitious and just kind of reinvent myself as someone who was doing something that was, that I just raised my game and had the freedom to do that. But in order to do that, you've got to fund yourself somehow. So that's the tricky thing. It's, funding yourself during those periods where you've gone rogue.
How did you fund yourself?
Well, I saved a bit of money from the previous deal, and then I got my husband to pay all the bills. And then later we reversed and I paid the bills. But yeah, luckily it's that old thing of needing some support, and you hear all the time about how creative industries are just filled with people whose parents are funding them. And there's truth in that, because it's feast or famine, and there's more famine than feast. So unless you're really good at sort of stashing away cash for the lean periods, you're going back, you're doing another job, and then writing in the at dawn or at weekends, and that's incredibly tough.
It's interesting that you wrote Our House out of contract, though, at a point when you were feeling, like you say, cut loose, because that is exactly what happened with Jojo Moyes with Me Before You. I mean, she had been cut loose by her previous publisher. She had no contract, like nobody was interested. I mean, they were all absolutely chewing their arms off now. But, so she wrote Me Before You, a book about a quadriplegic, out of contract. She wrote exactly what she wanted. I think, when it was bought, it was, to be honest, bought for 5.5 pence. And, I think that level of freedom to do exactly what you want. I mean, editors are really valuable and really important, and they can make a bad book good and a good book better. But it's interesting that sometimes when you want to go a bit rogue and write something that would not be safe as far as a publisher is concerned, you almost have to do it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, there are all different kinds of editors. Some are braver and more attracted to original material than others. But generally, I think that there's there's money, there's quite a lot of money involved. And so there's a temptation to be quite safe, to chase the trend, or to repeat something that's already worked. And so to do something quite different, and Our House was quite different, it was better to do it out of contract, I think, at that time. We're going back a few years now. And interestingly, Jojo Moyes and I have the same agent. And I do think that, it's very hard to be literally a lone ranger, but we both had an incredibly supportive woman by our side, saying, follow your passion. If you think it's a great idea, I think that we'll sell it and, we'll get it off the ground. So, so I wasn't completely alone. But I had been going to give up before our house. I had genuinely been going to give up because I had written 11 books and it felt like a case of diminishing returns. I wasn't being paid a whole lot. And I just felt like there wasn't a way of breaking the cycle. And so I had made the decision to stop, and I was thinking, what do I do next? Because I'd been a copywriter before and I was wondering whether to go back to that or to do something completely different, retrain in some way. But then I had the idea for our house, which was inspired by an article I read in the Daily Mail, actually. So thank you, Daily Mail. And
that is the first time anyone's ever said that on
no. I'm always flying the flag because it's just great feeding ground for me. All of the stuff that the Mail loves, like there's neighbours having feuds, and just some quite odd crimes and a lot of fraud. That's quite good research for me. All the papers are actually, all of the consumer stuff, all of the Dear Katie or whoever, the financial woes. It's all really good inspiration for me. But yeah, the moment I came across that story about someone stealing a house, I just had a physical reaction. I just knew it was special. I knew I could take this very faceless, cold crime and I could put it into an intimate domestic setting and make it poignant as well as an incredibly devious scheme. And I think that's what I try to bring to my books. I try to bring the personal relationships, but also a devious plot that might not be predictable, although I know, Sam, that you did predict the big twist.
Not because it was predictable, but because my brain is twisted and I read too much crime. But no, I did get the big twist. Not immediately, but yeah, I did get it. And then I kind of blew my own trumpet and my husband went, "You just read too much crime. Of course you got it, shut up." Do you get people doing what I immediately did when you came on to the Zoom, going, "I got it"? Is it really annoying? Do you just want to punch them?
No, I love it. I mean, I have to say with this particular twist, if there's a twist coming, there can't be that many things that could happen unless it really is going to be a kind of rogue ingredient that you could never have predicted, like a character appearing who, you haven't met earlier. It's I think if there's going to be a big twist, I think you could guess it because there are quite limited options.
You have got quite a small cast of characters.
Yeah, it's a small cast of characters. Yeah, absolutely. And so some people have said that, but I'd say about 90% of people who've read the book have not guessed so far. And then there's an earlier twist or an earlier revelation, and no one seems to have guessed that yet. So I think actually it's a pretty good ratio, but I don't mind at all. I mean, I really love hearing any interpretation of my work. I really believe, and I don't know if you feel the same, Sam, with fiction or with non-fiction as well, that once it's left your office and it's out there in the world, it doesn't really belong to you anymore. I think it belongs to every single individual who reads it, and what they get from it will be quite bespoke. And I never get tired of hearing those interpretations. And sometimes there are common things come up, like with this one. I'm astonished by how much people want to talk about Zara, who's the pregnant friend who moves in with Beth and Alex. Because to me, she was I kind of added her for balance, and I did kind of get a bit carried away with her, and I did enjoy writing her, but for me her role was to represent just how paranoid Alex could get, and so it's been really fascinating how many people raise Zara as their first subject matter, because to me she's quite peripheral, but she's obviously really got under the skin of a lot of people, which is really funny.
So that's really interesting, because earlier when we were talking about evil Zara, like Di said then, oh, evil Zara, interesting. I think that there is, I mean, I just want to say, I asked in the chat who guessed it, and Di didn't. Shelley guessed the big one, but not the others. Lisa didn't, gasped, and Joe was completely sorry, Joe was completely floored by all the twists, and Helen says, you mean it is a real baby?
There's quite a few. I mean, I have to say that I think I kind of by this stage sort of know what I'm doing. And I think I've reached the point where I think the balance is right with the number of red herrings and, the number of different themes where you're not quite sure which one's going to, which one's going to run and which one's going to fade away. So I can imagine if you were really being a wily detective, I can imagine you kind of going off along the wrong path with this book. Excuse the pun. Because there is a lot in there. It's quite a lot of meat on the bones thematically, and there's the DNA subplot. I guess it's quite subplotty, this one, and that's always good.
Yes, I'd forgotten about the DNA subplot. Yeah, I mean, I think with Zara, well, it kind of in a way it all goes back to the comment you made earlier about how we didn't, having to be out of contract to get away with writing unlikable characters. And I think it feels like it's a bit freer now.
Yes, I think so.
That maybe 7 or 8 years ago, you really weren't allowed to write an unlikable character, whereas now the kind of psychological thrillers made that more possible. But Zara is, well, I mean, I suppose some people like her. But that
no one so far, but yeah, I mean, I can't stand her. I think she's quite funny, but she's sort of full of the kind of corporate jargon, and she's a kind of, she's the classic herself, sort of do-gooder who, is always telling other people what they should do while actually behaving, abysmally. She's kind of the house guest from Helen that she's not moving out. But do you know what? I think she might have been inspired by a rewatch of The Office. And do you remember in The Office, it might have been the Christmas special, I can't remember, the British one, where there's a really annoying pregnant woman. And I mean, incredibly brave for the time, but because even now it's quite shocking to see such a horrible, dislikable pregnant person on screen, because it's, it's a kind of
it's not allowed,
that's so deified. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I thought, I'm gonna do me an evil pregnant woman. But
you're really good at that, nailing those. I mean, I think I'd actually, when I was making notes, I was thinking, like, you're really good at nailing a type, but never turning into cliches or stereotypes. They've always got depth, and they're always multifaceted. But it's like with Zara, because it would have been so easy just to make her a real, everybody hates her. I mean, literally everybody is saying how much they hate her in the chat. Oh, but
I love it.
Lisa says, I don't think anyone hates her more than Alex. See, I think I'm going to be controversial here. That I think that what I wondered if part of the point of Zara was to make Alex more sympathetic.
No, that wasn't the point. But given that he's not very sympathetic, I'll take it. If it does make him a bit more sympathetic, it was much more to represent how his mind is working. Because as I said earlier, you're always seeing everything and everyone directly through someone's psyche. It's not me, it's Alex, and so she really represents his sort of slowly losing control of his own sort of reason and ability to judge. And again, not to spoil it for Helen, but towards the end, in the final scene between Alex and Zara, I think you might, there's a case for completely sort of revising what the dynamic might have been. But I won't say any more than that. But really, it's about Alex, who she is to Alex. Because if you were to read, if you finish the book, and then if you have nothing better to do, you could reread all of those Zara scenes, and you can easily see that he's interpreted it one way, But actually, you know, she might just be a bit annoying. She's not actually done anything wrong. She's just, you know, she's just baiting him a little bit, I think.
I mean,
and
it's
it kind
a
of
good
doesn't really
point,
matter what
actually,
I
that
think
you're
either. Yeah, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter what my intention was. It's, you know, again, it's, you know, it goes back to, you know, what does the reader think? You can take it either way. And I think I will say about myself that I don't mind, you know, not sort of cleanly finishing everything and tying up every loose end. I do quite like to just let the reader decide in some cases. And I'd say that's one of them.
And that's a big change, because not so long ago, an editor would never have let you do that.
No.
Everything had to be tied up with a bow, didn't it? It's just like, and
Yeah.
you have to have an epilogue and another epilogue just to make sure every single character's future trajectory was sorted out.
Yeah.
Interesting thing coming up in the chat, like people not very keen on Beth either. And I think that now you say about it being obviously not your perspective, but Alex's perspective. I'm wondering if these views, like we've all got, like, oh, it's like Beth is manipulative. And it seems like sharing Zara's baby suited Beth and Zara, which it did. But we are also all seeing Beth and Zara through Alex's eyes,
Yes.
and totally buying into Alex's take on her.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you've got to ask yourself, you know, how did Alex, in fact, people have asked me, what did Beth see in Alex? You know, he's obviously got something so dark going on that he can't commit properly, and he can't, you know, he can't be himself, and he's sort of, you know, always trying to stay under the radar. And you know, that kind of sardonic attractiveness does wear off quite quickly, and she's still with him, but they do have this shared sort of disappointment, I suppose, where she really wants to start a family. Again, he's a little bit more ambiguous about it because of, you know, the kind of can of worms it could open for him. But they've been through quite a lot together, and they're living this kind of perfect suburban life, probably as in an environment where everyone they know has got young children and they don't. So, you know, he wants to move out. He wants to move to the city. He doesn't want to be a part of it. He doesn't want to be, you know, sort of traipsing down nature trails and, you know, sort of getting involved with family life. But she really wants that. And so, and I actually think that that he is so focused on his own problems that he isn't noticing what's happening with Beth. He isn't really, he's seeing this kind of evil person, and he isn't noticing what readers are noticing, which is that, you know, Beth is starting to live vicariously through Zara. You know, she's going to the antenatal classes, she's going to be the birth partner, you know, she's parenting this child. He hasn't even noticed that, but we notice. So yeah, it's all a kind of, it's all a sort of game, I suppose. It's all it's a puzzle for the reader, I think.
I mean, Beth she's very tied up in that kind of how that perfect suburban middle class existence looks, isn't she? And just like with those people, which is one of my favorites of yours, which is where basically these new neighbors move in and they're just not like the rest of us. Yeah.
Oh no.
But you're so good at skewering those, you know, what's the word? Can't think of what the correct word is, but those, I suppose, snobberies.
Yeah,
that so many people have tucked into there.
Yeah, because I find it ridiculous. You know, I find it, but also fascinating, and I've always seen myself as, you know, a bit of an outsider, which, you know, most writers do, don't they? But I do think I'm fascinated by class and status, and my background is, you know, kind of lower middle class. My parents are working class Geordies, and I grew up in Northampton, which is, you know, doesn't have these glamorous suburbs. And but now my life is in one of these affluent suburbs, and so I feel like I can bring both sensibilities to bear on the story. So I can kind of, you know, I can be critical, and but that's not hypocritical, if you see what I mean. And I kind of enjoy having, you know, sort of not judging at all, I don't think, as a kind of as the author, but just almost letting the characters hang themselves because of their pretensions and their you know, their determination to be seen to be being the best. You know, and it does very much you know, feel like a London thing, I suppose, or a kind of metropolitan suburb thing, where you have got quite a lot of competitive, high achieving people all living, you know, quite cheap by jowl, because of the property market means that you're not going to, you know, some of the jobs that my characters have, you know, sort of 30 years ago, they would have been in a detached mansion, but now, of course, they're in a terraced house in, you know, South London. So yeah, I find it really fascinating, and I enjoy skewering, and I really enjoy bringing in rogue characters. And particularly latterly, I really enjoy tackling things like the generation wars and the culture wars, and just letting the characters, you know, sort of say regrettable things and do regrettable things.
So where do you live? Do you live in a South London suburb?
Yeah, I live in Herne Hill, which I'm sure everyone's heard of Brixton.
Yeah.
I live on the edge of Brixton and Herne Hill,
On the posh
in
bit.
South London. So,
Isn't that
southeast London.
That's where those people were set, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
More or
those
less.
people, and yeah, our house and those people were both set on a kind of set in a kind of thinly veiled Herne Hill, Dulwich kind of zone. Southeast London, which, you know, not to get too London centric, but I think it has a particular kind of character and mood, being a real poor relation in London. So you know, it's a zone that's really kind of quite new to wealth and status. And, you know, you've got a lot of people there who are, you know, really thrilled that they bought their house for, you know, like 50 grand and now it's worth 2 million or whatever. And so, you know, there's a really good nouveau element to Southeast London, and that's where I live. But it's not, I mean, the zones in my book are probably a bit more like Dulwich Village, where there's nice clean streets and picket fences. Where I live, there's fly tipping and, you know, drug addicts. So in fact, we've got drug dealers on our street in the new low traffic neighborhood. Thank you, Sadiq Khan.
You say, do your neighbors hate you? Do they know what you write?
Some of them do. Yeah, some of them do. I think the ones who have raised it with me seem to enjoy the books. I do try and do a lot of local events, so but it's a key factor is to have fictitious neighborhood names, because then you really can create a composite, and no one feels under attack directly.
So what's the kind of what are you skewering in the next one? Because before we let everybody else in, we were talking about the fact that you're right up to your neck in the next one, and so you've got to kind of switch your head into the only suspect, and then switch your head back.
Well, this one is, because I think of The Only Suspect and The Other Passenger as slightly different from Our House, Those People strand. I think of them as a bit more kind of classic noirish, often with younger characters. But the next one goes back to that Our House territory, and I am taking on the holiday home issue. So
oh God, the second home.
The second home.
Airbnb.
And yeah, it's been a joy to write. And let's put it this way, I've got my usual smug characters, and then I've also got some young activists. And for the year that I've been writing it every day, I have read The Telegraph and The Guardian, so I can get inside the two separate mindsets. And it's been an extraordinary, it feels like a social experiment, what I've been doing, because you just would not believe that these were the same news items being discussed. I mean, they're just such extremes, and I don't even think of Britain as being particularly extreme in the way the US is. but it's been so fascinating to write. And also it takes me out of London. So so for the first time in a while, the book's not set in London, it's set down on the South Coast. So more on that soon, because I'm not supposed to talk about it at all, actually, but since it's you.
So when's it out? I was asking.
It'll be
next spring.
Next spring, yeah. I don't think we've got a confirmed pub date, because I just changed publisher, actually.
I saw.
Yeah.
Have you done a mega bucks deal?
No, I wouldn't say it's mega bucks. No, I wouldn't, honestly. But you know, obviously good. But no, I won't be moving out of my terraced house and into a, you know, enormous upgrade anytime soon. But it's more than enough for me to be able to carry on doing what I love doing. So it's fantastic.
Has anybody got questions for Louise? Do you want to get brave and turn your cameras and mics on?
Yeah, let's see you.
You can see she doesn't bite. Oh, Di, I haven't seen you for ages. So Di, I just have to tell everyone, Di and I used to work on Cosmo together about 150 years ago.
Oh my God, with my sister, perhaps.
Yeah,
with
Lou
Jane.
is Jane's sister, Di. You can turn your mic on so we can hear you say, oh my God.
Oh my God, of course. Every time I see your surname, I go, I used to work with somebody with that surname. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh my God, you guys at Cosmo were so lovely and supportive of my early books, reviewing them. And no, it was really, I'm so grateful. Back in the day when they sold like 3 copies or something, but it was just always such a joy to see those.
It was a living hell, wasn't it, Di?
Oh my God, it really was. I still remember, Sam, in my leaving card, you said, I'm going to really miss your barbed comments. And I thought, yeah, that's all I had.
It's all any of us had. That's one for another time.
Yes.
Who's got questions for Lou that aren't about me and Di working on Cosmo? Anybody?
I do have
No
one,
questions?
actually.
Go for
Alex. So Helen, I know you said you don't mind spoilers. You've been very gracious, but I'll try not to ruin it. But I felt like you had a bit of sympathy for him. You could have sent him down a different path, but it felt like
I absolutely love him.
Okay.
I have a lot of sympathy for him, not because, you know, I condone his actions, which in the 90s were not great, but to say the least. But I just felt, as I was writing and getting inside his head, that he had suffered almost as much as if he'd been in prison for 2 decades. And, you know, I was really interested in that kind of theme of, you know, psychological imprisonment and, you know, the fact that he has, you know, as we were saying earlier, his life has been sort of stunted by this guilt and by this need to conceal his true identity. And so, yeah, I actually, you know, I just felt like I could really understand how incredibly awful that would be. And then when he meets Drew later in the book, and you get that sense of Drew having moved on totally. And yet Alex is still back there in the summer of 1995. It's Arrested Development. And, you know, all of the lives like Beth's that, you know, he has affected by, you know, sort of deciding to act the way he did back then. So, yeah, I mean, I spent, you know, a year inside his head, and I had a lot of sympathy for him. And, you know, I think that's possibly reflected in his ending.
I loved it. It was just what I didn't expect. So, yeah, loved the ending.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Anybody else got a question? No? I'm sure I can think of another one.
I've got one. You seem to be really prolific in your writing, and does it? I think you mentioned you spent a year inside Alex's head. So does it take you about a year to do your writing?
Yes, it does. It takes about a year. So I've written 16 books, or 16 have been published. The Only Suspect is the latest one, obviously. And the first one came out in 2004. So, but I wrote it, you know, the year earlier. So it's been 20 years of writing with 16 books. So it's not quite one a year. Some of them, like Our House, would have taken longer, because I had the time, really. And by the time you get back into the publishing world, you know, they have to schedule you a year later. But yeah, it takes me about a year. And actually, I find that quite tough because the books are quite complex now. And I always want to add another layer, and I always want an extra polish. But ultimately, it does suit me because I get bored quite easily, and I'm really all about the ideas and less about the kind of finishing and, you know, the execution. So it starts to become torture after a certain point, and I've, you know, by then I'm more interested in something else, and I want to move on to the next thing. So actually, that kind of year treadmill, I guess you could call it, suits me quite well. But it can get, you know, I can get quite stressed out with deadlines because I'm actually creating quite complex books in quite a short period of time. And, you know, there are multiple other projects. I've got quite a lot of TV stuff on the go as well. So I've just become very busy. And so I would quite like to ease up to, you know, maybe every 18 months. And then, you know, one day, I guess the ideas will run out, and then it'll be maybe one every 10 years or something.
Don't tell your publisher
Let's
that.
see.
Are you tempted to do TV writing?
I have actually done some now. I've written the pilot for an original series, which is out with broadcasters at the moment. And it was really a lovely change. I've worked with a fantastic development executive at a big production company, and just learned so much. And it was just, you know, it really reminded me how good it is to have a change of discipline and to try something new. It just reopens all those creative valves. But I do find TV quite brutal. I mean, I think you can do quite a lot of work, and then, you know, the project doesn't see the light of day. And, you know, that's the great thing about a book contract, is that, you know that there's going to be a product that is out there one day. And even if it doesn't have a huge marketing budget, and even if it doesn't get into many hands, it's available, and, you know, there will be an audience, and it will be discussed, and the characters will be shared. But with TV, you can work quite a long time on something, and then, you know, it's just, it doesn't get made and everyone moves on. And so for me, that's quite brutal, because I'm used to working hard and then there being a tangible product at the end of it. So I've got a huge amount of admiration for the TV people I've worked with. They are, they're just tireless. They are, you know, they bounce back. It's really quite impressive.
How was it handing over your characters to another writer? Was that okay? Or?
Yeah, I find it okay. I mean, Simon, who did Our House and is doing The Only Suspect, I just really think he's amazing. I just think I'm kind of in awe of how he deconstructs quite complex novels and then puts them back together, but he retains the essence, and also he just seems to get the character. So I guess we just must be quite similar in that, you know, we've met these characters in our real lives and must live fairly similar sort of lives. But I enjoy it. I think it's quite hard to adapt a book. I think in many ways it's easier to do something original, because when you're adapting a book, you know, you are expected to retain a fair amount of that original material, and, you know, that it might not necessarily be naturally dramatic. There's so much interior stuff in a novel, and so I think it is a real art in kind of extracting the bits of a book that will work as drama and enhancing them and adding to them and filling in gaps. But I don't have a problem at all handing over my work to other writers.
I'm just having a quick look in the chat. Has anyone else got any questions? We've probably only really got time for one more. So has anybody got another question for Lou? I mean, Shelley has said in the chat, it's a tricky tightrope to stay true to the book audience and bring in a new TV audience. I mean, there's sometimes a book, an adaptation stays too true to the book.
Yes,
You
yeah,
know, and it just
absolutely.
doesn't
Yeah,
quite work because it feels like it's been
yeah,
religious, which is
yeah. It really depends, doesn't it? I mean, I think our house was a- so many elements were really heightened and defined in a way that I had left quite ambiguous. I think you can be a lot more ambiguous on the page. And so sometimes that kind of, you know, ramming it home with a TV adaptation, you know, can disappoint lovers of the original book. But you have to remember, I think, just that, you know, far more people are watching it than have read the book, and so it's got to be a brand new successful experience for them. But sometimes I've some of my favorite adaptations have been almost page for page like the book. I don't know if you saw the BBC's adaptation of Life After Life, the Kate Atkinson.
yeah, that's a really difficult one to adapt.
Oh my God. And yet it was exactly like the book. I couldn't identify a moment that wasn't in the book. And I just thought, wow, what an incredible job. I don't know who the writer was who adapted it, but that's massive. To me, that's just the pinnacle of adapting skills. It was just beautifully done. And, you know, I couldn't separate it from the book, and yet it just worked on screen so well.
Well, I've got two questions to finish off with. One's
Okay.
silly, one's not. Firstly, do you have a kitchen island?
No. Oh, actually, kind of. What we have is a really strangely designed kitchen where it's not an island, but what it is a kind of spur that comes out from the wall. So it kind of acts as an island. It's more like two corridors. It's more like two galley kitchens, if that makes sense, rather than an island. Do you have a kitchen island?
I've got like two butcher's blocks stuck together from IKEA. But you have single-handedly destroyed the kitchen island.
I don't know if I've even mentioned a kitchen island in my books, but I think I am synonymous with them. But
it's that ITV drama, Fabulous House.
Oh my
sliding
God.
doors.
Yeah.
Like
that
kind of house
kitchen
you'd
was
never
beautiful.
be able to afford on anybody's salary.
Yeah.
And with a great big kitchen island. It's probably
forget.
not your fault. It's the ITV drama.
No, oh my God, that kitchen was actually in a studio, it was a sort of built for the show. It wasn't in someone's house. Lots of the stuff and the exteriors were a real house in Southeast London, but that kitchen had been built by someone, and it was kind of supersized. It was really quite big. But yeah, don't forget she works in homewares, old Fee. So she's probably, you know, sort of adept at picking up bargains in flea markets. And probably got a discount on the marble, do you think?
Yeah. And this is why you're the successful writer. And last one, if anybody who hasn't read Barbara Vine, I really urge you to. She's so good. Where would you start? There actually can be quite hard to get, I think, but several of them are out on Kindle now.
Yeah, well, I think A Fatal Inversion is a great one, but the masterpiece, the real jewel in the crown would be A Dark Adapted Eye. That's one of my favorite books of all time. I only read it recently after A Fatal Inversion, and I just, you know, I felt like, do you ever do that where you finish the book and it's so seamlessly constructed that you almost want to go back and write out a plan of the chapters to kind of see how she's done it? That's how I felt. It's just wonderful, and particularly if you like a kind of you know, roaming narrative across several decades, wartime. It's really a fantastic portrait of women's lives across the 20th century. It's a fantastic book, A Dark Adapted Eye. That would be the one to start with. But try and keep a weekend free, so because it's quite backwards and forwards, and so you want to kind of devote yourself to it. And I don't think you could sort of read half a chapter on the train every day for, you know, 6 months. I think you want to do it all in one go.
You'd have to keep going back.
Keep going back to the beginning.
I think, is that the one that, this is just such a random thing, that was, I think there was an adaptation, which I thought was ITV or BBC, like ages ago, like 80s or 90s, with Pauline Quirk?
I don't
think-
know.
I bet
don't
it'll be
know.
on BritBox or Amazon or something.
Yeah,
It
it's
was a really
sure
good
to have.
adaptation.
Yeah, it's sure to have had a TV or film version. But I don't think I've seen it. So could be. Yeah, not sure.
And I'm going to give the last word to Lisa, who's got an area at the back of her garden behind a hedge. And now, if this is all your fault, anyone walking along there is a suspect.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my mind's in overdrive.
Yeah, especially if they're carrying a shovel.
Why are you there? What are you doing, hooligan?
Yeah. And in that case, Lisa, you definitely shouldn't read the latest Jane Casey book, because she also has a dodgy passage behind a hedge along the back. So it's obviously a...
Oh, really? Is that the close?
Yes.
That's in my pile. That's in my pile.
Oh, it's really good, but all manner
So-
of stuff goes on in that alley, so you do need to watch
Oh,
it.
really?
And I'm in Northamptonshire. So they must be thinking, why is she standing at the back window watching?
Yeah. No, I mean, all of those kind of back alleys, kind of embankments, anything like that is just absolutely perfect for domestic noir, because, you've got that kind of, the voyeuristic possibilities, a legion, but also there's the kind of secret goings on after dark. So yeah, I'm not surprised that the back
honestly,
alley is cropping up.
you don't want to spend too much time with any crime writers, because Paula Hawkins said she literally walks around looking for places to dump a body. It's like, you're a weird bunch. Thank you so much, Louise. You've been completely brilliant. And thank you everyone for coming. It's so nice to see you when you put your cameras on. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah. Thank you very
Thanks.
much for having me, and lovely to meet everyone.
Well, thanks, Lou, and thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.